welcome everybody. Thanks for the video, Alicia. I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of the partners of Alliance for Water Stewardship and IWRA. We are very pleased to be with you today to share on this global public consultation on the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard, version 3.0. And my name is Faith Lawrence. I will serve as your moderator for the next hour. And I head up the policy engagement for the Alliance for Water Stewardship. I'm very excited to be part of this call today. And also, this is our very first co-shared webinar with IWRA. And my hope is that it's the first of many to come going forward. So without further ado, we have, maybe just to start us off, we have some ground rules, and maybe I can just quickly share them with you. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We will have a question and answer session afterwards, so feel free to also put in your questions in the Q&A section on your screen. And of course, you know, this meeting is recorded, so we're hoping that it's going to be a dynamic exchange. I'd like to now introduce the two speakers. We will have two speakers. We will start off with Lesha Whitmer, who is the Vice President of the International Water Resources Association. She's also Chair of the Partnerships and Affiliation Committee on the board. She is an independent senior advisor with more than 25 years experience specializing in water governance, strategy, policy, structure, and particularly with stakeholder involvement in transboundary contexts. She's also an expert in sustainable development, gender and equity strategies, and policy and tool development. I'm sure you all know Lesha, and her impressive profile also includes Special Advisor to WWF International on Transboundary Conventions and to the Nile Basin Deputy Chair, Strategic Advisory Committee of the World Water Quality Alliance. And she serves on many different steering committees linked to women and partnerships in an advocacy leading role, but also advisor on women and water, and also is a member of the UNESCO WWAP Water and Gender Working Group. So very impressive CV, Lesha, and we're very excited that you're going to be opening our event as well on behalf of IWRA. After Lesha, we will have Tyler Farrell. Tyler is the Standards Manager at the Alliance for Water Stewardship. He holds a master's degree in water security and international development and has a strong track record of delivering water stewardship programs with partners in business, government, and civil society. Tyler previously served on the Alliance for Water Stewardship Technical Committee and has an in-depth understanding of the AWS Standard and system, as well as extensive practical experience in delivering water stewardship training and capacity building. We will have a very specific format. Lesha will provide an introduction. Tyler will present on AWS and the standard revision process. And then I'll try and field your questions after that. So we're looking forward to a very engaging session. With that very brief introduction, I'm going to ask Lesha now to please open on behalf of IWRA. Over to you, Lesha.
Hello, everybody. After such an introduction, Faith, I'm almost getting tired. But anyway, you forgot one little piece of information. And I think to explain why IWRA is now a partner of AWS and vice versa, that might be an important part of information. Tyler, a long time ago, I was your predecessor. I was in the first International Development Committee that developed the standard version 1.
Oh.
So I know AWS pretty well, and I know the standard pretty well. Having said that, it's a pleasure for me to open this webinar. Sorry. And let me start by adding two things on the informational video. One is that the membership of IWRA is around 5,000 individuals around the globe. And that we also have institutional membership, not very large, and mainly aimed at involving the people who work in those institutions into the task forces and the conferences and what have you. Second piece of information, put it in your calendar. The 1st to the 5th of December 2025, we have our next World Congress in Morocco. So stay tuned for that. Having said that, why did we partner with AWS? Well, there are always, of course, some formal reasons, and they are in our official MOU. But you can also already understand it if you know what IWRA stands for. One is providing an international forum for water resource issues, and especially advancing water resources and related environmental research. We want to promote education throughout society by improving global access to relevant data and information and make it understandable for people. So not ends up in a drawer, but we actually start using it. Enhance the quality of knowledge used in decision making, improve exchanges of information, expertise, and network and work together with other organizations to advance a common interest. And of course, if you hear that, you understand why we'd like to work more closely with AWS. And I think this webinar is already an example of that. But it's also to say AWS, we have loads of members who know what they're talking about. And I'm quite sure that if they would know a little bit more about AWS and the standard, that there might also be interest to support AWS in further research or in the next round of reviews or whatever else that you're looking for. So for us, one of the reasons to work with you on this webinar is also to promote the knowledge about the standard, not only because of the review, but also to make people aware that this standard exists and that it is a roller coaster. We never stop improving, I think. And for that, you need people and hands and brains and interest. So I think that's why we are here today jointly. I certainly hope that also one of our other goals is to also reach out for us to another public. So the membership of AWS is definitely another one than from IWRA. And we absolutely believe in cooperation and do joint stuff, including some advocacy for good practices in the water sector. So here we are. And with that, I hand back to you, Faith.
Great, thanks, Lesha, and thanks for reminding us about our common interest around credible leadership in water resources management. And I like that you stress the importance of quality knowledge in decision making and how do we advance our common interest as well. So definitely excited about our collaboration going forward. I'm going to now ask Tyler to do the introduction on AWS as well as the standard version 3.0. And hopefully this will be the start of our engaging collaboration around the standard revision. Please remember to put in your introductions in the chat. We're going to track that. And if you have any Q&As, I'll be monitoring that as well. Over to you, Tyler.
Great. Thanks a lot, Faith, and yeah, thank you so much, Lesha, for the setup. I think that's precisely what we're here to do today, is to tell you a little bit more about the AWS standard, talk about the review and revision process, how we're trying to make improvements, and let you know how you can get involved in that. So I really hope that from this, more people learn about the standard. We really, as Lesha said, we're always seeking to improve. And the more people that we have involved in this process to share their experiences, share their expertise and input, I think the stronger the standard gets. So very happy to be speaking with the members of IWRA today. So I will speak, I'll run you over a quick agenda. You already had the introductions to Faith and myself. I'll speak a little bit about AWS and the AWS Standard, talk about the review and revision process, and give an overview of the changes to the draft of version 3.0. I'll then speak about the public consultation process and how you can get involved, and then we'll have a period there for questions and answers. So we're expecting approximately an hour. It's possible we might wrap up a little bit sooner depending on the amount of questions and discussion that we have. So for those who are totally new to Alliance for Water Stewardship, we're really two things. First and foremost, we're an alliance of businesses, civil society, and public sector organizations who are coming around this idea of water stewardship. Secondly, we're a sustainability standard system, so something kind of akin to fair trade or Forest Stewardship Council, only focused on the responsible use of fresh water. So our mission is to ignite and nurture global and local leadership, incredible water stewardship that recognizes and secures social, cultural, and environmental and economic value of water. So we are a nonprofit organization headquartered in Scotland with a team that's spread around the world. In terms of our membership, just to kind of give you a bit of a flavor, I mentioned the three main categories are civil society, private sector, public sector. We also have other standard systems who are amongst our membership. This is just a sample of those who have joined. And we have many partners who are even founding partners. I think Lesha mentioned her early involvement in the foundation of Alliance for Water Stewardship. Also founding partners here like the Nature Conservancy and WWF, amongst others, who've been engaged in the system and helping it improve over the years. So currently, I think we have about 200 members. And we're always seeking to increase that involvement, particularly in the public sector. I think where we could use more engagement, especially at the national level. So if that applies to you, do please inquire about membership. So the standard itself is really kind of a how-to framework for applying water stewardship. So it's a site-based standard. So it's a site that would apply the standard and seek certification. So an industrial site or agricultural site, and it's focused on the site's interaction with a broader water catchment. So it involves a site understanding their use of water, how they're impacting on the local resource, who are the local stakeholders, laws and regulations, the main water risks and challenges, and developing water stewardship actions based upon that. So it's built around 5 steps, which are first gathering understanding. That's kind of gathering data, understanding the context in which you're operating, your own water use. Committing and plan is developing that water stewardship plan, which responds to the issues within your water catchment. Then you have your implementation of that plan evaluation. So you're always seeing how you're doing, how you can improve and tweak your plan, and then the communication and disclosure. And that's a bit of an iterative process, right? It's just kind of, it's not a matter of just implementing it once and being done. It's an ongoing process of maintenance. And the standard is intended to deliver 5 main outcomes: good water governance, sustainable water balance, good water quality status, healthy important water-related areas, and safe water, sanitation, and hygiene for all. So it's a sector agnostic standard in the sense that any kind of industrial sector, large water users can use it. So we have sites from across the food and beverage industry, from textiles, agriculture, and pharmaceuticals, personal care, all sorts of different sectors who are using and certifying against the standard. So within that kind of world of sustainability standards, it's generally considered best practice to review a standard every 5 years to see that it's still delivering on its intended outcomes, that it's still applicable and up to date. We conducted a review of the standard last year, and we decided to undertake a major revision to update the standard. So we're going to be updating from version 2 to version 3, and there's 3 main aims of that process, which are to increase the practicality, the utility, and the value of version 3. So practicality is really about streamlining the standard to make it cost-effective for companies to implement at scale. Utility is about supporting alignment with other sustainability agendas and priorities, such as climate change and biodiversity. And value is about strengthening integration with corporate level reporting. So in terms of the governance and decision-making for this process, we have an AWS technical committee, which represents our membership, and they are the body that has overall responsibility for this process. And ultimately, it will be our members who will vote upon adopting the next version of the standard. So that's how those decisions are made. Regarding the process and where we are in that, we spent the last several months developing a first draft of the version 3.0, and we opened a public consultation on that draft in October, which will be closing later this month, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. Following that initial public consultation, we're going to be reviewing that feedback, analyzing, publishing a synopsis essentially of how we're responding to that feedback, and then developing a second draft of version 3, and that will go out for a shorter public consultation of 30 days. Following that, we'll then develop a final draft, which will then go to the members to vote upon for approval. And we are hoping to launch the standard in September 2025, although this timeline is provisional and potentially subject to change. So just a quick word on our technical committee. So the technical committee is appointed at the AGM, and it represents the AWS membership and the balance across the sectoral interests, so civil society, private sector, and public sector. They're really responsible for developing, well, the AWS standards, guidance, assurance requirements. So they have a pretty broad and important remit. And they compose of a maximum of 12 members split across those membership groups. So these are the individuals who currently make up our technical committee. They bring a lot of great experience and different perspectives for different parts of the world. And we're very thankful to them for the hard work they put into this process so far. Regarding the draft of version 3, I'm going to take you through a summary of changes. This gives a high-level overview of the main changes to version 3 based around those 3 aims of the process: practicality, utility, and value. So I'll go through each of those individually. So on the practicality front, the first is around streamlining requirements. So the draft of version 3 has 29 fewer requirements, which were previously referred to as indicators, than version 2. We've done this by kind of clarifying the scope of the standard, consolidating requirements, and removing those which were not considered to be kind of adding to value to the standard or contributing to our mission of water stewardship. So it is a shorter version, which should be, I think, more cost-effective for sites to implement. There's been a couple areas where we've removed requirements of the standard, in particular around indirect water use. There are requirements in version 2 around understanding the site's indirect water use and acting upon that. The feedback that we heard was that a lot of people felt there was a mismatch between a site-based standard and these requirements, which are in the supply chain, given that that supply chain decisions are often made at a corporate level rather than a site level. And it felt that it wasn't a really good fit for the site-based approach of the AWS standard. So that is one area where requirements have been removed. We've also made changes to our approach to advanced requirements. So the draft of version 3 includes fewer advanced requirements than version 2. And we've taken a more focused approach to advanced requirements, and we're proposing just to have one set of advanced requirements which all sites would have to comply with if they want to achieve a higher level of certification. Currently, we have a selection of advanced requirements that sites can choose from to accumulate points, but it's proposed that we'll be changing that, and it'll be just one set which will be consistent for all sites who want to go for that higher level of certification. The third area is a pretty broad but very important area around kind of clear requirements for conformance and then simplification of language. So one of the areas of feedback that we heard was people were having trouble with different interpretations of the standards. So people were reading it in different ways or understanding it in different ways. So we made a real strong effort to write requirements in a way that make the expectations for conformance very clear for the sites and the auditors alike. And we've made some improvements around the requirements for gathering catchment data, for stakeholder engagement, and target setting have all been improved in this regard. Overall, the language in the draft has been simplified to be more accessible to readers. I think we recognize that we have a very broad user base in terms of technical expertise, first language, what have you. And we want to make sure that we're not using too much jargon. We want to reduce the jargon, phrase things in a way that are clear and concise. So we made an effort to shorten sentences and really make the requirements more easy to understand. And finally, here is a clarification of concepts and terminology. I think this is kind of related to the previous point, but several concepts that we use in the standard have been clarified by revising the definitions in the glossary. So we receive feedback that concepts like best practice, important water-related areas, physical scope, people had trouble interpreting and applying those. So we revised those definitions to make them clear. And we added new definitions for concepts like resilience, collective action, and biodiversity. So utility, again, is about supporting that alignment with broader sustainability agendas and priorities. One of the highest priorities we've had for this revision process is integrating climate and resilience into the standard. When we conducted the review, that's what we heard very loud and clear from our stakeholders, is that it's important that the standard addresses climate and resilience. And we have made changes in this draft to include requirements for sites to understand the climate trends and water-related impacts within their catchment, and to identify climate risks and demonstrate efforts to improve resilience. So that's a pretty fundamental change. So key revisions have been made to the requirements for the Water Stewardship Plan and for the Incident Response Plan to ensure that they are building resilience. The second big area where we heard was a high priority for our stakeholders was biodiversity, and this is related to important water-related areas. So this concept of important water-related areas is meant to kind of capture areas of social, environmental, cultural, spiritual value which are related to water. It's been a concept that I think has been a little bit ambiguous to date, and people have struggled in interpretation. So one thing we sought to do is clarify that concept, but also more strongly integrate biodiversity into it. So we've changed the definition of IWRAs. They're now defined as natural water-related areas of high value from a biodiversity, ecosystem services, social, cultural, or spiritual perspective. And the requirements related to IWRAs and biodiversity have been strengthened to include requirements for actions at both the site and the catchment level. The third area here is collective action. So for those who are kind of involved in the water stewardship community, I think you have known there's been a real shift in recent years towards the need for collective action, which is based on a recognition that sites individually doing good water stewardship isn't enough for us to achieve the sort of change that we want at the sort of level that we want, and that we recognize that we need to work collectively in order to address those challenges. So we've made an effort here to more strongly integrate collective action into the standard, given it's a critical approach for addressing water challenges, and it's a key principle of good water stewardship. So revisions have been made to reflect the importance of collective action, namely requirements for sites to identify opportunities and to participate in collective action have been added at the core level of the standard. The next area here is around desalination and reuse. Now, the standard's always been intended to be applicable to all types of fresh water, including desalinated water. But we've had, I think, the logic of the standard tested a little bit in recent years from sites who are either wholly dependent or partially dependent on desalinated water. So especially in parts of the world like in the Gulf states, people were kind of questioning, well, how does the standard work in our context if we're using entirely desalinated water? How does that fit with the kind of catchment-based aspect of the standard? So revisions have been made really to ensure the standard is equally applicable to those sites that are depending on desalinated water, either entirely or in part for their water requirements. And definitions and requirements have been made to make that linkage between freshwater and marine ecosystems in contexts where desalination is coming from a marine source. Finally, we've added a requirement to recognize and encourage water reuse where it is appropriate. I think there's a real recognition of the potential of water reuse for improving efficiency, for reducing water usage overall. But at the same time, recognizing it's not always appropriate depending on the sector you're operating in, the part of the world you're operating in. But we want to include an aspect to both to recognize that, to encourage it where it is appropriate, because it can be a good action to take for water stewardship. And finally is value, which is about strengthening that integration with corporate level reporting, which again was a high priority for many of our stakeholders. So a little bit of context here. Within the EU, we've had the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming into effect in 2025. And this is a mandatory disclosure framework for companies to report on essentially their environmental impacts and what they're doing, what are their policies, what actions are they taking environmentally. And one aspect of that is water. So to explore this topic, we commissioned a study to review the interoperability of the AWS Standard with the new CSRD disclosure framework, especially the one on water and marine resources, and has found there's a pretty high level of interoperability between the standard and the CSRD standard. So it was recommended that we prioritize further alignment and help develop guidance for helping companies to aggregate data from their sites to be reported at a corporate level. So in the draft of the standard, we made revisions to create greater alignment between the CSRD E3 standard and our standard. We've included amongst the changes the water use intensity, option for sites to provide an organizational water policy in place of a site water stewardship strategy, and additional requirement for sites to specify whether targets in their plan are required by legislation. And with these changes, the information gathered for implementation of AWS Standard version 3 can directly inform 31 of the 51 indicators for the E3 standard of CSRD. Sorry, there's a bit of jargon here, and that's an increase from 20 in version 2. So we're seeing greater alignment and interoperability between this draft and the CSRD standard. And we're going to be further exploring interoperability with other CSRD standards, including pollution, climate change, biodiversity, ecosystems, amongst others. And once it's finalized, we'll be developing guidance for sites to aggregate data and report that at the corporate level. So that is an overview of the changes, and there's a summary version of that on our website. We'll put a link into the chat. You can download that in English, Spanish, or Chinese, which gives an overview of changes along with the draft. And this brings us to the global public consultation. So we launched this consultation back in mid-October. It was initially scheduled to close at the end of this week, but we've extended that to get more feedback until the 20th of December. So about a week and a half from now, that this first round of consultation will close. There still is an opportunity to participate. As I mentioned before, we're going to be gathering this feedback, analyzing it, and we'll publish a summary of the feedback we receive and how it's being addressed. And in terms of getting involved, to participate, you can start by downloading and reviewing the draft of AWS Standard version 3. The document contains the draft criteria and requirements, and it includes a change log, which summarizes essentially how this draft version compares to the current version of version 2 of the standard. And it also has a draft glossary, which includes new and revised definitions, as well as a change log. You could then provide feedback in one or two ways. We first have a high-level feedback survey that's available in English, Spanish, and Chinese as well. We can give your high-level kind of impressions of the standard and feedback. And then you can also provide detailed feedback on specific requirements of the standard by adding comments to the document itself. So the document is in an Excel format. There's a column there for feedback. You can add your feedback to the column and then upload that using the form on our website. So we'd really appreciate if you're interested. This is something that's applicable and interesting to you. Really appreciate your feedback. We appreciate you sharing it within your own networks, within your own organizations. And you're free to provide feedback as an individual or on behalf of your organization. So I'll put that link in the chat just after I wrap up here. And I think we'll get now to the questions and answers. And I think Faith, if you've been monitoring the chat.
I have been monitoring the chat. Maybe just thank you, Tyler, for that. Really appreciate it. Just a quick challenge. Some people are struggling to put comments into the chat. So please use the Q&A to introduce yourselves. If you still feel you want to, we'd love you to introduce yourself. So please use the Q&A. And I see there's only 2 comments, just not linked to there's one from Fortune Manikira, who's inquiring about AWS membership. Fortune, thanks so much. We really hope you're going to be commenting as well on the standard revision process, and we will definitely you'll be able to get information on our website on membership. And please feel free to engage on that. So we getting some more introductions in the Q&A. If you have any questions to Tyler on any specific elements of what he shared around integrating climate change, or the topic of resilience or reuse, that's something that usually comes up quite a lot. Please feel free to elaborate as well. While we wait for more questions, Lesha, do you want to maybe comment? What I love is that you were part of the first standard revision process, and I'd love to hear your reflections on how we've matured as a standard since your very first round. While we wait for comments.
Okay. Well, there are a few things that struck me. One is I'm always happy when people say we want to diminish the jargon, because that is a big threshold for a lot of people. What I do remember from original debates was also how to translate, because some languages have definitely different definitions of words, like watershed in English and French is always a problem. So did you look at that as well? How it translates in other languages? So that was a question. What also struck me is that you took out the indirect use. Yeah, and on the one hand, I can understand the let's say the management reasoning behind it. But what of course is a big issue, especially if you look at water use, is that people are really not aware how much water they are actually additionally using, because it's in the products. So yeah, I understand the reasoning, but I also have a big question about it, because if I remember correctly, 40% of our water use is indirect. So that is a big chunk. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. Yeah, I don't have the time to check on the definition, but can you say something about what you changed in the stakeholder definition? Because that also struck me, because that's not an easy one.
Yeah, I think the indirect water use, we anticipate, a lot of feedback on that, right? Because I think it's a pretty fundamental change. As you say, it's largely the feedback we had was largely on a practical level, which was that sites were finding, for the stuff in their supply chain that was coming from across the world, that in many ways they had a hard time gathering the information in terms of, what is the water use associated with this, or having any sort of real influence over those suppliers, right? Because they're operating at a site level. Usually procurement is done at a corporate level or a higher level. So there's a bit of a mismatch between what the site could feasibly do and what the requirements of the standard were. So in a way, it was quite limited. And in version 2, we limited the requirements that sites really had to focus on things that were coming from within their own catchment, right? And oftentimes you're finding, well, most of the supply chain, the stuff that companies are using, it is not coming from within their catchment, it's coming from elsewhere, right? So the requirements there were a bit, they weren't really delivering on what we were hoping they were delivering. So I think that there's acknowledgement that the supply chain aspect is very complex. It almost merits its own standard or own separate approach. We felt like the current approach we're taking the standard isn't really doing it justice. So there's a bit of a question we have to ask ourselves is do we want to include this within the scope of the standard still, and potentially really have to fundamentally review those requirements, or is it something that is almost merits its own separate piece of work and that we really want to focus just on the site? So it's an area where I do anticipate quite a bit of feedback on both sides of that, and we definitely welcome that because it's an important debate to be had. The stakeholder piece is we didn't necessarily review the definition of stakeholder, but we changed the requirements to be more explicit around who needs to be consulted. So again, this comes back to this idea of like interpretation of the standard, right? And whenever there's ambiguity in the standard, you can potentially have differences in interpretation, right? So we'd often get a lot of questions of, well, how many stakeholders is enough stakeholders? 5, 10, right? People wanted to be specific, and we can't give a number, right? It's not because it all depends on the context. But what we did is we included in the stakeholder requirements in this draft specific stakeholder groups that should be covered. So it should cover environmental groups. It should cover any sort of suppliers you have within your catchment. It should cover regulators, local governments, local communities. It's very explicit that those need to be considered. So I think what can seem like a relatively minor change, I think is actually quite fundamental because it makes it very clear who needs to be included here. And that helps from an auditor's perspective, because then they have something they can point to and say, well, have you considered this type of stakeholder? Why haven't you considered this type, right? So I think that's a pretty important change around really tightening what we mean by stakeholder engagement.
Okay.
Okay, I can't seem to see any additional questions in the chat, other than just to say thank you for all of you who are busy introducing yourselves. Thank you very much. I wonder if there are any additional questions from the community present on this call. I don't see any coming through. Tyler, maybe if you want to just say any last comments,
Sure.
and then maybe we'll hand over to we'll move to conclude.
Yeah, absolutely. We give people time back in their calendar. I will just kind of quickly say again, the link is now there in the chat for the consultation. So if it's of interest, please do get involved or share that in your network. If you haven't already, encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. That's where we make all announcements about the standard revision process and other pieces of work, and also updates from our different membership, our different aspects of our membership. And also just to mention that we have our annual forum every year in Edinburgh. This year it's going to be in late June. So if that's something of interest, if you are a member or considering membership, please do have a look on the website. And really just encourage you that if you have any questions about this process around the standard, don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach me at Tyler at a4ws.org, and happy to follow up with you there. but really appreciate your time, and I can turn it over to Lesha for any closing remarks.
Before we do that,
Mhm.
there was one. Oh, that's perfect. There was just one comment, one question, in the chat that's just come up.
Okay.
We have 4 treaties in the world, 4 treaties that talk about this. So the problem is not that we don't have laws and treaties in place to address that. Water use, but also availability of infrastructure and what have you. Also in terms of conflict and war, we really have the legislation. So the problem is not that we don't have the rules, but we have a problem with sticking to the rules.
Mm.
That would be my answer. And two of the big treaties, one is, to begin with, is the Charter of the United Nations. It is very explicit about not damaging people's natural resources and infrastructure. But there's a lot to say about that. But yes, we need rules, but even more, we need somebody willing to police them and say, you can't do this.
I think there was there's a comment about inclusion of water use intensity. And then, of course, the comment which you just responded to a bit is around, there was a comment of that we need more laws as well.
Yep. I can comment just briefly on the water use intensity. This is something it's in the CSRD reporting indicators, and essentially it's a measure of water use, essentially but it's compared to in financial terms. So essentially, I think it's water use intensity per like net revenue, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to look back at it, but it's looking at essentially kind of a dollar per drop, a sort of metric. Compared to other water use efficiency, which is usually about how much water is used per unit of production. So say per kilo of coffee produced or whatever sort of product is being produced. So that's what water use intensity is about. That was included, I say, largely for that greater alignment with the CSRD requirements.
There's another question about how do you overcome or bypass institutional barriers in difficult places, such as Myanmar, and this is a comment that came from someone from the Myanmar Water Academy. I think, Lesha, do you want to maybe make a comment, and I can also
yeah,
come in.
Nini, my dear friend Nini, you always know how to ask the difficult questions. I mean, I think it part of it depends on what the type of barrier is, you know. And if you are in a potentially difficult governmental situation like yours, then the answer is very difficult because you don't know who to address. But I think there is part of it is that's why the international community comes in, because sometimes people from outside can help you to get access to people that can help you. So this is a quick and dirty answer, I know, Nini, but I certainly understand the question, but I don't think the standard as such can answer that. What people on the sides can do, though, is to be good governors themselves. So at least comply to the local and the national regulations and treaties that are in place. And part of that is a start of it, because it means that a local operator in a catchment will say, okay, in this case, I'm going to do it like this, because this is the way that we agreed to do it, and I comply with that. And that's a start. So that's the level I think local operators can do something. Influencing the overall problem is a totally different process.
But there's also another way to also appreciate it, is that there are also examples of other countries who have similar institutional challenges and who have managed to navigate that landscape in a creative and strategic way. And I think we need to, with our international community, I think we need to draw on that expertise, as you pointed out, Lesha, and also draw on the examples and the experience of those who've already tried to address it in similar circumstances. But yeah, as you say, it's quite complex around that. Okay, I think we've now managed to go through all the questions. I hope that we have ignited your fire and that inside of you, and that you would all comment very purposefully on the version 3 of our Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard. My request and plea is that you really spend time helping us make this really a meaningful standard for all of us. And I really look forward to getting the comments from the IWRA community. Thank you, Tyler, for your input. Thank you. I'm going to ask Lesha to maybe conclude with if there are any announcements, Lesha, maybe you could share that with us, and then we can move to conclude our webinar.
Yeah, well, let's start with from the IWRA angle. There are two things. One, if there's anybody out there in the audience, because I can't see all the names and the affiliations, that likes to be involved in some kind of work together with AWS on aspects of the standards, or the implementation of it, or the guidelines, or the PR, let us know. Please let the office of IWRA know, and we'll see if there's appetite to form a small group that will take that on. Secondly, I repeat that we will have our next World Water Congress, and I'm sure AWS will be there to give also their inputs in December in Morocco. And then thank you, Tyler and Faith, for taking this initiative, and and Leonore, who is in the background, not visible at the moment, from IWRA office, to take the initiative to do this. I think it's very important, also from the goal of from both of us, to spread the word and make the standard better known, and if so, much more used than it already is. And having said that, I think I wish you all a wonderful rest of the afternoon or the evening or wherever you are, depending on that. And happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays, everybody. Thanks,
Okay,
everybody.
thank you so much.
Thanks, Lesha.
Take care.
Bye.
Pleasure.